Good morning, everybody. Show of hands, can you hear me? All right. Hey, thank you all for attending Apttus Accelerate. My name is David Reuter. I'm the Vice President of Global Alliances at Apttus. And in our ecosystem of partners that support our product, implement it, take care of clients, we have a large number of partners in the ecosystem. My team manages those relationships. And my personal background is about 20 years of delivering complex IT and business solutions to clients. And one of the things I've learned in that time is that all solutions have a cost pyramid, and they start at the very top. The small piece of the cost is the business process. How do you design your workflows? How do you design what the inputs and outputs and outcomes of a business process are? The rest of the pyramid is driven by that. So all your support, your systems, and all the costs that is the majority of the world that make up that process are driven by those very top-end business processes. So I'm very pleased to introduce to you today a group of folks that are going to talk to you about some real-world business outcomes of implementing Apttus CLM solutions. And this is really to talk about what is the value you get out of implementing a world-class CLM solution. So I think we're just finished miking everybody and we're on stage. So it's with pleasure that I want to introduce to you Duffin Phelps, one of our very strong partners in the CLM space with many implementations and a long history of driving customer value. And along with them, a mutual client from Gilead Sciences. I'll let you gentlemen introduce yourself and begin your presentation.
So I'm Michael Stevens with Duffin Phelps, and I'll let everybody else introduce themselves.
Tyler Marion with Duffin Phelps.
I'm Mike Gadsett with Duffin Phelps.
And I'm Greg Bennett from Gilead Sciences.
Great. Just real quick, for those who don't know Duffin Phelps, we're a 2,000 plus person organization. The folks on the stage here focus on large enterprise system implementations, contract management being one of those, and that includes the transformation of organizations. But Duff at large does many other things, including valuation, tax advisory services. We have offices in 70 cities throughout the world, and then there's our office locations. So let's go ahead and jump right into the session. What we want to talk about today is how contract management can be a platform for transforming the organization. So, beyond just a tactical implementation of software, how do you actually use that as a launch pad to then transform and improve the operations of both the people, the process, and as well as the technology around contracting. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some real world examples of what some of our clients have done that are fairly innovative in all these areas, just as examples of what's possible in transforming organizations.
So I will talk about the people aspect of it. Prior to joining Duffin Phelps, I was Associate General Counsel for United Health Group. We worked in a very large legal department, so we had many people working on the contracting process. And I think something that I want to carry forward while we're presenting today is Greg. He's a real world client. He has the problems that a multi-billion-dollar company has, and he has the people that go along with a multi-billion-dollar company. When there's a lot of people involved in your contracting process, it gets confusing very, very quickly. So one of the things that we like to help with is, are the right people doing the right tasks? And are you doing it with as few people as possible? And do those people have a vested interest in the outcome? Clearly, people are going to talk to you about reducing the number of people that work on the contracting process, but sometimes they don't actually talk about the vested interest portion. If somebody doesn't have a desired outcome with what is involved, then it's just a task that they have to perform. So something that we like to do with our clients, and it's carried across in these three buckets, is aligning what they're doing to the task. So to put it another way, if I have to spend 15 minutes opening up a document to be reviewed for a specific type of clause and rooting around, I'm wasting valuable time and I'm losing my vested interest in it. So if everybody has an aligned task, they know that the lawyer has to go in and they have to look at one provision every single time. They know exactly what they're supposed to do. They know exactly what's supposed to be opened. And with systems like Apttus, it can be presented in front of them for a very quick analysis and a quick execution. So what we're doing is we're speeding up the contracting process, we're giving people aligned tasks, and we're helping with reduction of the people that are involved in executing the contract, or in your case, reviewing the information that's presented in front of them from contracts that have been executed. So in these three examples, and I won't go through all three of them because that's a waste of your time, but to look at them for their global view, it's define responsibilities. That's something I just talked about. It's also ensuring appropriate tasks. Are people being redundant with what they're doing? And again, this is something that Apttus can help with: designated tasks, designated responsibilities, and designated resources. And then it's capacity. At Gilead or at UHG, there were hundreds of people, but you could run out of capacity very, very quickly if people were doing the same things over and over and over again, and it was redundant with 17 different people. So we really help our clients, really take to our clients that if you're doing the minimum amount of work, the product is effective, then you can expand your capacity. You don't have to outsource to get your capacity. It's just about, are you doing the right things with the right amount of time?
Yeah, so Tyler, why don't you drill down a little bit on the middle example, and then we'll have Greg talk about one of his. So we talk about this organization had people performing tasks that were kind of beneath them in terms of capabilities. What was the solution, and how did you solve that problem?
Sure. So we call it task elevation. In this particular example, our client was hiring very expensive lawyers, and they were doing blessings of NDAs. An NDA is a very rigid document. It doesn't have a lot of moving parts. It's a very simple document. The NDAs were going to these very expensive resources that were being tasked to do due diligence for M&A or do very large deals. So what we're talking about here is a very simple document that was going to a very high-priced resource. We removed that workflow from that resource and gave it to a legal analyst. It's a simple fix, it really is, and it can be applied and replicated for different types of contracts. But it's a good example of 20 lawyers in that legal department were bogged down with NDAs. You remove the NDA from them, building a workflow within something like Apttus, and then those 20 resources can now focus their attention on what they were hired to do.
Okay. And Greg, do you want to talk a little bit about
Sure.
Gilead's experience?
So over the past few years, Gilead has grown exponentially, relatively short period of time. And so our contracting, as you probably all experienced too, is a little disparate. But we have a centralized repository for contracts that, the task was, if you have an executed contract, put it into this repository. Now, speaking to tasks, a lot of different types of employees would enter these contracts with just a minimal amount of data. So as we are moving into Apttus, what we found is we have to pick up that repository, shut it down, and move it over to Apttus. And the value add that we're seeing here is that with this third-party service, with data validation, is that with many thousands of contracts, we are going in contract by contract, looking at those terms, validating our metadata, and it'll be a nice, clean repository moving forward. So the real value is that we will provide our business owners of these contracts really accurate data, and really moving forward, we'll have a better sense of our contracting universe.
Yeah, so let's dive in that a little bit just for the audience. So the historic picture was legal didn't want to load signed contracts in the old system, so they put it out to the business users, and the business users then delegated down and down the stack of employees and even non-employee contractors to load them up. And the end result was, what type of data quality were you getting in the system?
I think our first grade was we have a 60% data quality or data accuracy.
Right.
And when I first heard that number, I'm like, 60%? That's actually
That's
good.
a D, that's okay.
Well,
yeah.
then you said, well, that's a D minus, Greg. I'm like, okay, never mind.
Yeah.
But
yeah, a D minus, but then we get to that low level of accuracy, the reliance on the tool goes to zero, and so nobody's actually searching in the tool because you can't rely on any single data value. Let's move on to the process transformation. So in this area, what we found is, the people and processes obviously have to match up. What often happens in companies without controlled central planning is that you get the normal reaction of every group is doing whatever they wanted to do. And so what we've typically found works well is if you get a global framework for your contracting process, but then let it be adaptable by contract type or by region as appropriate without breaking your global framework. Because ultimately every contract type is documenting, the document of that contract type is documenting some business transaction, and that business transaction has its own unique process. So you have to fit within those, larger, company-wide processes of either quote to cash or source to pay or a clinical trial process. But within the boundaries of the contract, you can create a global framework that is flexible enough while still providing some rigidity. So we'll have a couple examples here. So Tyler, do you want to talk about maybe the first example?
Sure. So it's a cataclysmic change for a large company to institute contract management. It changes the way that a business operates on a day-to-day basis. You need to have a win to show that what you're doing is right for the company. It's worth the money you're spending and it's worth the investment. So what we have here is that, the way that we work is we pick a champion. We pick a win, a successful business unit or a successful contract type, make sure it runs the way that it's supposed to run, make sure that the workflows and processes are in place, and the people. And once you have that, then you can actually use that as a champion amongst the other parts of the business to show that the process works. So in this example, we had a very large company that was kind of scattered in how they did their business process, their contracting process. It varied by department, lots of gaps, no standardization. Legal was really in a pinch because they couldn't keep a capstone on the process. So we helped them change one business unit, showed a win, and then we're able to replicate that within the company because of viability of that business unit and trust in the new product.
Mm-hmm. Great, and I'll talk a little bit about the second one. So the second one's a specific example, but it's a broader case study in identifying the weak links in your process. So each contract type, as I talked about, is documenting some underlying business transaction. And one of the things we help our clients with is making sure that there's enforcement mechanisms in that business transaction. So if it's a procurement contract and you've got controls in place with procurement that says you're not going to get your purchase order until the contract's signed, that's great, that's an enforcement mechanism. If you don't have that sort of enforcement mechanism, you need to make sure the contracting process has those enforcing mechanisms. And what we found within organizations, when you look at your roster of contract types, some contract types have a natural enforcement mechanism at the end. There must be a signed contract before the business transaction is fulfilled. Some don't. Some contract types have breakdowns in the middle of the process, either in the approval cycle or the signature cycle, because your business community hasn't been trained. So, while you might have the best implementation of Apttus CLM and the best training plan in place for approvals and signatures, if you've got business executives out there who are signing paper contracts that have not gone through the process or approving contracts that have not gone through the process, you've got a huge weak link in your process. And that goes all the way through every step of the process, whether it be document assembly or the negotiation cycle. So we really look at the end-to-end business process to make sure that there's no weak links where you get either leakages, so where contracts get lost, or enforcement mechanisms. Otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of money and not get the compliance you're looking for. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the technology arena. Here, Mike, do you want to talk about this a little bit?
Hi, so I think about technology, and what I do when I think about technology is I tend to step back a little bit from it and squint a little bit and see what it's really trying to solve. And from my perspective, technology is trying to really solve two separate problems. One is an information gathering problem. It's trying to simplify that process of gathering information. And at the same time, it's also trying to enable getting interesting bits of data out of that information. And those two requirements that technology is trying to meet, there's a natural tension between those. And the people in the process folks talked a lot about that. The more information you gather up front, the better information you get, obviously, in the back end. But if you ask your contract requesters to enter a lot of information, you're going to get 60% on your score instead of 100%. So that's the stuff that technology is trying to solve. It's trying to find a way to find the right balance between the front end work and the back end advantages you get out of it. So we have a couple of examples where we've made some efforts and we've done some art, that I think of it as art, about how we find that right balance between gathering information up front and providing the stuff on the back end. You want to talk about Gilead? And
Sure. So at Gilead, beginning of this implementation, we didn't really have that real centralized set of master data. And so we went a fairly simplistic route and made it within the account object in Apttus, which I think is going very well. But over time, that allows us to actually, so that we don't get bad data, we don't get over a long period of time, we will actually implement a quality control mechanism around that account object and around the contracts too. And just to speak to what you said, you know, in the long term, what we really are going to build out is with that data quality, the quality control check, we'll have a good sense of where our contracts are, right? A good positioning. So that's
Another good example that I find interesting, and you guys may not find this stuff interesting, but I really find it interesting. We had a global Fortune 500 company, and they had this process that we were replacing was they had sports marketing reps that would go out in the field at the beginning of each season and try to sign deals with all the athletes. So for example, they go out at the beginning of baseball, and they just hang out on the side of the field and meet the athletes and really understand the athletes' potential, and then they'd sign deals with the athletes. And these deals were really simple, standard, small contracts, but there was hundreds of them. And the guys were out in the field, and the process that we were replacing was they'd print out a whole bunch of standard, deals, and they're just little one-pagers. The company would give them some product and give them a little stipend, and then, depending on how they performed over the course of the year, they might get more. But it was pretty standard. And so they'd print these out, and they just write the guy's name on the top, and then they'd ask him to sign it. Well, that process was great for those guys, but the problem is half of those contracts would end up underneath the seat in their rental car, and they'd forget to bring it back with them, or they just end up in their desks. And we needed to get that data into a system so we could report on it on the back end. So what we ended up doing was we used Apttus, and we gave these guys an iPad, or a tablet, I should say, and gave them a super simple interface. So for example, baseball, they would open up that tablet, and there would be one question. And it would say, are you talking to a pitcher or are you talking to a player? If you're talking to a pitcher, it was a different contract. If you're talking to a player, it was another contract. That's the only question we asked them. They'd press a button, and they'd have a contract right there. They could show it to the athlete, and the athlete could sign it right there, and we had it in our system immediately. From then on, we were capable of providing the kind of back-end information that the execs wanted, which was how much money, what are we committed to? How many contracts do we have? We couldn't even answer those questions when we started. So that's, to me, a really good example and a fun example of how we found that right balance between gathering data in the front end and providing the information they needed in the back end, and using technology to simplify that process.
Another example is not on the slide here, is actually with Gilead, is their clinical trial agreement. So if anybody's familiar with the pharmaceutical industry, when you have a drug that's ready to go to clinical trial, you're picking out 300, 400, 500, sometimes 700 to 800 sites that you're going to run this trial at, and you've got to get a series of contracts in place as quickly as possible so you can start the drug trial. So at Gilead, we're going to take that and use the X-Author for Excel tool to mass create 500, 600, 700 contract requests at once, and those 500 plus contract requests are actually going to get multiplied because each site needs more than one contract document to be part of the study. So we've used technology to take the people and process and really automate it to speed up that process. And we think we're able to shrink the cycle time to get those drug trials started. And that's just on the front end of the process of getting the first draft out the door. And then we're doing other things with Apttus later in the process to speed up the approvals and signature cycle as well. And then, Mike, do you want to talk a little bit about the last example?
Sure. We had a company. So if you think about the front end, what they wanted to do was gather data about all proposed projects, and in the back end, what we really wanted to be able to do was manage the approvals, because proposed projects within this company, this was an incredibly complex set of approvals that they had to go through, depending on the size of the project and what verticals within the company were involved, and I mean just all kinds of different variables we had to capture in the front end. So over the course of 5 years prior to us coming in, they had developed this massive Excel spreadsheet, multiple tabs, and they'd sit, so anybody that wanted to do a project in this company would go sit down with their finance person and spend a month filling out this Excel spreadsheet. And then once that was done, and the finance guy said, yeah, it looks like we can make money on this project, let's do it. Then they had to go through a very, very complex set of approvals depending on all these different factors that are in this spreadsheet. So what typically happened is the finance guy would walk along with a business person and carry this thing around and get all the approvals. And then before it went to the executive committee, the executives admin would look at it and make sure you had all the right approvals, and if you didn't, then they send you on your way. So there was a lot of drama around every project, and every time, and every gate, every approval gate, there was a lot of drama, and there was lots of projects that would get to the gate, and then the admin would say, oh, sorry, you don't have the right approvals, and send it back. So lots of cost, lots of time involved in getting these projects started. So what we did was we took that Excel spreadsheet, and you guys can guess the answer. We used Xauthor for Excel and modeled that straight into Apttus. So we captured that data at time of entry. So we knew right up front, and we could use the approval engine to figure out what approvals they needed. So the users, the guys that wanted to run projects, knew right away what approvals they needed. They didn't have to guess. They didn't have to wait till they got to the admin, to find out that the approvals that they needed some approval they didn't know about. And so the Apttus process in the back end helped manage all those approvals and reminders and getting everybody to do the approvals. So when it got to the executive committee for approval, the execs had their phones, because execs won't log into any system, and they would bring up the project, and they'd see, yep, everybody did all their approvals, everything's ready to go, I like it, and they'd approve it on their phone. Simplified the process, speeded it up, and it took all the drama and all the angst out of whether or not my project's going to get approved.
Yep. If I were to go back to the very first slide, we view this as a continuous loop. You can't design the people and then design the process and then design the technology. These have to be done in a continuous improvement loop, because some of the examples we've talked about, somebody might want 300 data fields about a contract, but until you design the people and the process around who's going to enter that data, at what point in the process, what's the data quality step, all that has to be thought through in order to make this a real solution that's going to be adopted, sustainable, and not drive people absolutely insane in usage. And that's just one example of where you need to make sure you've got all three pieces in play when you're designing every aspect of your system. Greg, is there any other examples you could think of that we want to?
Not necessarily examples. I'm going to defer you with a question, though.
Sure.
With the room full of people, you've been through a number of meetings. I call it the can it meeting, right? Well, can it do this?
Sure.
Can it do this, right? What would you recommend for people who are implementing Apttus to be the best approach? Because you've been with a room full of attorneys.
Sure.
And about a new contracting mechanism. What is the best way to extract information that you would need to input into this design or method?
Great question. So, stepping back from before you even get into the room with the business users to do those kind of detailed requirement sessions, what we'd like to do with our clients is roadmap what's the end state going to look like. If you're to create your inventory of all your contract types, and then have the life cycle of the contracts from request through post-signature obligation tracking. Not every contract type requires the same degree of automation, the same degree of design, and so you really need to inventory. What is the end state going to look like? For a simple contract, we do 3 of them a year. The answer might be you really don't care about the life cycle because you're only doing 3 of them a year. You really care about just make sure you capture them in the repository at the end. Other contracts where you're doing 5,000 of them a year, and there's lots of complex data, and it needs to be integrated with the quoting tool or integrated with the ERP system. That type of contract, you might need to think about the process design of every step of the life cycle and have a really complex data model. So you first need to map that out, and then when you walk into the room with the business clients, you're having a discussion about a particular contract type, and there's already this roadmap of what is the end state going to look like, right? So if it's the contract where it's going to be really complicated, and both from a process design and a system design, workflow, and a data model perspective, the discussion might be more involved around how are we going to crawl, walk, run to get to this end picture, because you're not necessarily going to get to that end picture in the first phase, but everybody has the same framework in mind of what the end picture looks like. and then a roadmap to get to that end picture.
Yeah.
But in terms of collecting the actual tactical information, I think it's important to break it down into component parts that the business users can understand. Are you talking today about data model? Are you talking today about workflow and responsibilities? Are you talking today about the people organizational structures? You got to break it down into component parts that they're able to get their mind around. And there might require several meetings to then come to a full design on that contract type, keeping in mind that all these things have to fit together.
Well, I think an interesting point as well from the last presenter, they had a line up on their slide that said, don't let the software wag the strategy. Maybe I botched that, but it's something to the effect of, the software doesn't need to dictate it. Well, I'll take it a few steps further. You can't let any one of these three dictate the other two.
Correct.
It needs to be in equal parts, and it needs to be a conversation. Greg, you mentioned legal. Lawyers treat contracts like children. It's something that's very precious to them. It's something that they put a lot of time and energy in, and it really guards the business, its assets and its risks and liabilities. So you need to foster that with legal. You need to talk about how this software is not going to make your contract just a piece of paper or something robotic. It's actually going to foster the provisions that you've taken so much time to diligently vet and temper and place in this contract. And the software will help you. It's not going to hinder.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would add to that too, that I think going in, the first question I always ask clients is, what problem are you solving for? And we start with a conversation about what it is that what their real pain point is. Because that helps sort of frame up that conversation when they say, can it? Because if it can't do my job for me, which we get a lot, right? That's not what the pain point, that's not what we're solving for. And so to me, I mean, getting that clear up front, getting everybody to really understand and buy into this is what we're solving for, helps with those conversations later on.
Right.
And to circle back to my original story from the beginning is that on a very global scale, again, we have lots of contracts everywhere, we have lots of repositories, we have lots of templates, other contract systems, but they're not all centralized into a real functioning mechanism. So we can see the value of putting these things together and making that come out correctly. Now, it's not going to happen overnight. We are approaching it very slowly in digestible slices, but over time, putting this methodology together is highly valuable at the front end, right?
Yeah.
So.
And not specific to Gilead, but other clients. One of the toughest problems that people need to ask themselves is, what are the roles and responsibilities during the contract process? And there's no one right answer, but the organization's got to make a decision. So, some of our clients take the view that there's going to be a contracting group that's going to offload from the business users virtually everything around contracting. All the business user needs to do is ask for a contract, and then this contracting group does the drafting, the negotiation. They drive approvals, they drive signatures, and they drive making sure all the data is right in the system. Other clients take the view that the contracting group is essentially like a law firm, right? They're there to provide legal advice and opinion, but they're not there to negotiate contracts or things of that nature. And once again, there's no right answer, but those fundamental roles and responsibility decisions have to get made on the front end before you can have any of these discussions around the people and process and technology. And what's happened in many companies is that that decision has been made without conscious and forethought, really just by historical happenstance in some companies. And the answer might be different by contract type, right? So procurement might have taken the lead on negotiating procurement contracts, but revenue contracts, it's something different's happening in terms of those responsibilities. And so you don't necessarily have to have the same answer for every contract type, but you have to have a answer for your contract types on those division of roles and responsibilities.
Questions?
Okay. Yeah. Any questions from the audience? If not, we'll let you get to the food trucks. I smell some wonderful food out there.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank
for
you very
missing the
much.
roadmap.